right, guys. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. I'd like to kick off our February meeting. Hope everyone's staying warm and full of toilet paper and $8 eggs as we get ready for this coming storm. I'll start off the business of approving the minutes for the January meeting. Can I get a motion? Steve, a second? Thanks, Brad. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, let the minutes reflect the passage of the minutes. We'll kick off with the chair's report. And before we jump into today's agenda, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge everything that's happened since our last meeting. And it's remarkable that only a month has passed. And since then, the new administration has acted with extraordinary speed. Some of you may be excited, perhaps even exhilarated by the change. But for many of us, this change has been a deeply negative impact, both either personally, professionally, or both. And as Arlingtonians, I think we're particularly impacted just given our tie to the federal workforce. So really, I just want to put this in the room because I know all of us are feeling it, and many of us are directly impacted by it. And as we are conducting our business of EDC, I would just ask that all of us have grace top of mind. And as we are discussing topics, that we extend each other and a little bit of extra grace, because I think all of us are dealing with a lot. And I wanted to thank you for all being here, for showing up, and for being committed to the Arlington way. The new president doesn't dictate our values. We do. And we are here as leaders of the Arlington community to help put us on a track to help keep Arlington's community and our economy growing and thriving, all in a way that's consistent with our values. So it's in times like these it's most important for us to keep gathering, keep talking, keep sharing ideas, and really to keep looking for common ground. And so with that as a backdrop, I'm really excited for us to be diving into workforce this month. This is a topic that's central to EDC's mission, and it's arguably Arlington's most vital asset. We have two great speakers today. Brandon Bedford of AD's, and he's AD's Assistant Director of Business Intelligence, and David Remick, Executive Director of the Alexandria Arlington Regional Workforce Council. I expect we're going to be covering a broad range of topics. One key issue that has come up repeatedly in our EDC meetings, and hopefully one that we'll be able to kind of get our arms around, is whether or not our region is losing the key demographic of workers in the late 20s to their mid 40s. Is this happening? If so, why? And is this something that we need to address? I'm going to try to keep us on track so we have ample time for questions and discussion on this topic. I'll then turn it over to Nick for updates on the Commercial Vacancy Working Group, Evan for updates on Transportation Advisory, and under new business, I'll ask Praveen to report on the county manager's virtual meeting with county commissions to discuss the fiscal year 26 budget. Praveen, thank you for representing us. With that, I'll turn it over to Ryan for the director's report.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Kevin. And I'll pick up a little bit on where you just left off. We're going to talk and give you a couple of stats and more details on the federal footprint in Arlington when we kick off our presentation. But let me begin by just talking a little bit about kind of some of the message I sent to our staff last week, maybe picking up a little bit on what you were just saying. As economic development practitioners, we have to look at every challenge and try to find the opportunity. And that's what we've been doing on a number of issues that we're tracking. And I'll share what those main ones are right now, because I'd love to hear if there's any feedback on that. But the bigger point that I made to our team is that despite what's happening in Washington, D.C., we are staying the course on our strategic plan. That is a document that outlines what I believe is our best path to economic growth for this community. And so I've told my team that our mission, our vision, and our values and our plan have not changed despite whoever took office in the White House. We've also are going to continue to focus on building our team and culture here. We've hired and filled almost every vacancy that we've had since I've gotten here. We've had one or two just kind of come vacant due to natural turnover. And every time we filled a position, we've gotten just a new outstanding member of our team to build on the outstanding folks that are already here. So we'll continue to do that and make sure we have the right people and brain power here to help execute our plan. We're going to continue our data-driven approach. I think I've been very deliberate in how I've approached this job and how I'd like this department to contribute to our economic growth, and we'll continue that. We're not going to jump at every headline or every change or proposed change or fake change that is coming out of Washington, D.C. We will respond when something is real and potentially impactful to us. And then we're going to be working to strengthen our partnerships across the county and the region, because there's always better ideas when you have more people in the tent, and there's always, I think, better outcomes when you create strong partnerships. And so we're working already on that here in the county, and I'm going to be reaching out to our partners specifically in Arlington over the coming weeks to kind of touch base and to make sure that we're all aligned. And then finally, I've asked all of our team as economic developers to continue to leverage their entrepreneurial mindset and problem-solving skills. That is the thing that we can do best. We can bring a different lens or a different angle on a problem, and we're doing that every day. And we just have great people that work here, and I'm really confident in our path forward. Let me go back and just talk. So that's just kind of where we're at as a state of AED. And I welcome your feedback and thoughts on any of that. As leaders, I know all of you are dealing with this, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Let's talk about some positive news. We've got 3 cool things that have happened that are happening here at AED that I wanted to share today before we get into the presentation. First is, you all have heard about our Arlington Innovation Fund. I think most of you know that we've given out grants through that fund to 9 companies. And we had one that we're now allowed to talk a little bit more publicly about because it was in the news. But Genlogs received a grant, a $50,000 grant from AED in 2024. And last week they announced they just closed their Series A funding round. And they have raised another $14.6 million, which brings their total raise to $21 million since their founding in just 2023. Genlogs is a freight logistics company. And if you want to learn more about it, Michael is here and he can talk to you after the meeting because I'm not sure I really understand everything that they do. But they're just like a really rapidly growing company that we're really excited to have in Arlington. And they've, in addition to their raise, they've also hired 43 employees, and about a third of those work right here in the DC area. And so the Innovation Fund, this is a great example of how we've set aside money, we're seeding companies, and we hope to continue that next year. We've asked for that fund to be reinstated at the $1 million level and as part of the county manager's proposed budget. And that budget comes out on February 22nd. The second program, also related to the Business Investment Group, we just launched what's called our Tech Launchpad. This is a program that aims at attracting international and domestic tech founders to Arlington. This is really aimed to be like a high touch program. A lot of times what you'll hear these called are like soft landing programs. And on the international side, we know that companies that are starting their first, opening their first office in the States need a lot of support, whether that's legal support, learning how to hire employees here in the country, navigating real estate decisions. All those things are very different if you're not from here. So this program really aims to build towards something where we can be hosting companies here for an extended period of time, multiple months, so they can learn and experience Arlington and hopefully settle roots here. But we're starting with virtual programming based on our current resource levels in February. We're then going to leverage the Select USA Investor Conference, which is held every year in May at National Harbor. It's a big international investor conference. We're going to leverage that to host 12 companies here for extend their stay here in Arlington and let them do an immersion program to learn about Arlington. And then if we get funded next year in the budget, we hope to start hosting companies here through a more deeper immersion program. So we're very excited about this. Information for companies on how to participate is on our website. And so we'll keep everyone updated on how that's going. But the early indications is we're getting a lot of traction from companies that want to be here in Arlington. And then the last update is we just released yesterday a new arts placemaking grant opportunity. The county board, as part of increasing funding for the arts grants program this year, gave us $100,000 of what's called one-time money. So we just have it for this year. And in coordination with the Arts Commission, we launched a new grant program that really hopes to provide two $50,000 grants for organizations that do a mix of art and placemaking. And so we're really hoping to make, this to be a catalyst investment to kind of jumpstart something very exciting in our commercial districts. And so the grant applications are live on our website. They're due March 21st, and the Arts Commission, in their role as the overseer of arts funding in Arlington, will be the ones who evaluate and make recommendations for funding to the county board. So we'll keep you updated on that. But I really want to give Michelle Isabel Stark from our Cultural Affairs Department credit for kind of coming up with this concept to do something unique and really try to spur getting the arts into our commercial districts in a creative way. And so we'll keep you updated on how that goes.
And when are those due?
March 21st for the arts grant application. And that's online.
Okay.
Ryan, if I could just add some color to the Arlington Innovation Fund. We met with Ryan Joyce, the CEO of GenLogs, at the chamber to welcome him, of course.
Yeah.
And he, in asking him about his organization, I'm a tech person myself, so I was very interested in the collection of data that they're doing. And he 100% attributed his location in Arlington to the grant. He himself does not live in Arlington. He lives out in Middleburg or somewhere further west. But he said the grant is the reason that he's here. And so it is definitely clearly a link between grant and new company now being hiring, thriving, growing, based in Arlington.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Steve. That's great feedback to hear. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Steve.
Just ask a quick question. Go back to the change in administration. Brian, are there any things that you are worried specifically about, or that the county board is worried about, that you can talk about, that maybe go beyond the splashy headlines? Obviously, this administration talks a lot about immigration or changing that. Kevin mentioned we obviously have a lot of federal workers here since we're right across the river. But are there any other things that are anxiety inducing for the county as a whole that we as commissioners or residents might need to be aware of, or that we're not thinking about because it's not like the hot button top of headline issues?
Yes, but let me give you let me talk about those hot button issues and then I'll work my way towards some things you might not be hearing about. So we're trying to think of this, or I'm thinking of this as two kind of buckets. You have like federal government operations, if you will. So federal workforce, federal footprint, and contract spending and things of that nature. So we know that we have significant potential challenges if we're going to see mass layoffs, resignations of federal employees. We'll give you some stats in a minute on that. And really, my biggest concern there is, we're hearing some folks say, well, this is great for Virginia because we have 96 or 100,000 or something, some huge number of job openings. That's not a one-for-one, in my opinion. And so what I'm concerned about is the brain drain and people who have potentially are high income earners with still years of work moving out of here and moving out of Virginia and moving out of Arlington. Because there's either not the opportunities here or they feel like, I got to get out of this region. So we're starting to talk to the board and we're talking internally about what local and regional efforts we can do to help around, and state efforts around retooling, retraining, keeping people here if they are what we call displaced from their job. So that's one key issue. On the federal footprint, we're trying to see that more as opportunity. Our federal footprint's not that big. And Jen, can you go ahead and just pull that slide up for me? It's 5.3 million in lease space, split kind of almost evenly between DoD and civilian. And so we feel like if we saw some kind of crazy scenario of people pulling out of leases and the government canceling leases and moving people back into federal space downtown, we're trying to see that more as an opportunity for redevelopment and doing something new with those assets. That's not to say there wouldn't be pain. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, but we're trying to see that more as an opportunity. So that's the second piece. Other things that we're monitoring, we are already seeing some drawback in tourism and visitation, mostly from international visitors. We've gotten our tourism team, Emily's here. We've already gotten emails from people who are planning to come from Canada saying, we're not coming anymore. We're likely going to see that increase. And to give you some perspective, we about 10% of our visitors are international. We had 7 million visitors last year. So almost 700,000 are folks from overseas. That doesn't mean every single one of them isn't going to come, but that would have an impact on our tourism economy. So that's one area that we're monitoring. In addition, the potential for immigration, immigration policies that the administration have put forward, we are concerned about impacts to those in our community who are potentially undocumented or from immigrant backgrounds. And we know that our tourism economy, our hospitality economy, many of the employees that work there are from immigrant backgrounds. And so, if we suddenly see a real, people drawing back in, moving out of the area, things like that, that is a potential workforce challenge for us. We haven't seen much yet on administration policy on small business, but we again think that there's potential opportunity there given some of the past performance. But if we start seeing things like the cancellation of set-asides for minority, women, veteran-owned businesses and things of that nature, given some of the rhetoric around DEI, we could see some of our small businesses who have traditionally tapped into SBA loans and SBA programs not being able to access that critical capital. And then finally, the just kind of generally speaking tariff and trade policy, we are concerned about the impact of that on all costs, but predominantly construction costs, and what does that do then for future investment in our real estate market. And so those are the high level touch points. We're looking at everything every day it comes in. We've mobilized we've got a team now that's just monitoring and tracking this information. We're trying to feed that to the county board. We're doing some of those briefings this week. So I don't have a good indication yet of their major concerns, or if that differs than anything I said. And we're starting to reach out to our regional contacts through the NOVA EDA and other organizations. I spoke last night with the head of EDP to express our concerns about some of the things I just spoke about, asking him to take a role as the head of economic development for the Commonwealth. And they're trying to mobilize some people right now just around data information and collection to understand kind of potential areas of threat. And the General Assembly just last week formed a bipartisan emergency committee on federal kind of issues that won't start meeting until after the session's over, sometime probably in May. But their kind of goal is to understand the scenarios and see if there's a state response. So everyone is mobilizing. Right now, though, we have not seen, and this is knock on wood, but we have not seen or heard of people whose leases have been canceled. We have not, we know that the layoffs are occurring in our community. We haven't seen a huge uptick in that yet. And so, I think we're trying to be measured against what we hear every day or read every day and what is actually happening. And that's sometimes very hard to figure out, but that's the role that this new team and our leadership team at AD is trying to play, is how do we kind of keep everybody, aware of what's real and kind of ignore the distractions at this point. But hopefully that's helpful. Yeah.
Do you track a list of the GSA leases in Arlington, or at least like the top 20 in size?
Yeah, we have that. Yeah. Yeah. And we've been reaching out to we'll reach out to those owners if we hear of things. I mean, fortunately, you can see on the screen of our leases, a little over half are DOD. The other civilian agencies are national security and State Department. And the state stuff is around diplomatic security, law enforcement. And so we're not taking anything for granted, but we feel more confident that the leasing the agencies that lease in Arlington are more higher priorities, if you will, for the administration, but we can't be certain on any of that.
Paula, and then I think we're going to close it off. Keep it going.
Yeah, on the Mason side, the NIH cap of indirect costs is going to have an effect, less so in Arlington than it will on Fairfax and Prince William, but it will still have an overall effect on infrastructure and being able to handle infrastructure costs because it's expensive to run labs. The other thing is, so my team runs 8 federal programs from 5 different agencies, and we're getting questions kind of across the board, all supporting small business and entrepreneurship. The Women's Business Center in particular seems to be getting the most number of questions, and we had applied for a supplemental to help specifically women in Arlington help set up daycare centers, and AED had provided matching funds for us to get that. So we received notice that we had gotten that, and now it's, as far as we can tell, it's been retracted. So that was kind of a holdover from last month's conversation about daycare centers and what an extreme need it is.
When you say questions, do you mean from like the government procurement office or officer?
None of the questions are coming directly from the agencies because they can't talk to us. They're going to the national organizations and then coming to us.
Thank you for sharing. That's it.
Just from the nonprofit lens, I just think it's important to bring up that a lot of our housing comes directly from HUD or from the state, and it all runs through our government. But when we had that pullback in funding, that was an immediate stop of rent payment for all nonprofits who are housing folks. So you talk about people not canceling their leases yet. No, not yet. But should HUD change its lens on housing first, which is our mantra and everyone else's, that's going to have a pretty large impact on housing and evictions. So I thought I'd just throw that in the room.
Yeah, and I would echo that. From the affordable housing community, vouchers are on the list of things that we feel like are at risk. So, Nick, did you have something?
I'm going to come back to this when we have our update.
Okay, well, great. It's a good discussion. Thank you. let's move on to the main event. Yeah. go ahead.
Only thing I'll just intro is that we had this on the agenda for discussion prior to all this stuff we just talked about. So you're going to hear more of a general overview, but Dave and Brandon can hopefully answer any questions if it pertains directly to federal employment, but you're going to get more of a global view today. And with that, we'll let the guys kick us off.
Okay, great. So I'm Brandon Bedford. I'm the Assistant Director of Business Intelligence here at Arlington Economic Development. And as Ryan mentioned, a lot of this presentation was scheduled and compiled prior to a lot of what's happened in the past couple of weeks. So this is really more geared toward being a general overview of what kind of workforce trends and demographic trends in Arlington, rather than a response to the last couple of weeks. Though feel free to ask questions, and if Dave or I have answers, we'll answer it. So
Take them up.
yeah. So next slide. And then, so I guess we'll kind of zoom out really far to look at employment in Arlington. And when we're talking about employment in Arlington, we're referring to jobs located in Arlington, regardless of where the person who works in them lives. So according to Arlington County CPHD, there are about 221,400 jobs physically in Arlington. Of those, 214,200 are wage and salary jobs. Now, as you can see over here, the resident civilian labor force, these are workers who live in Arlington but could work anywhere. There's 162,626. So obviously, a lot of people commute into Arlington for work, which makes sense and would explain I-66 and all kinds of fun stuff. So, as far as residents living and working in Arlington, that's at 57,528. Now let's take a look at kind of the industries. So this professional and technical services is the top industry for jobs located here. And what we mean by that is really kind of those white collar jobs, like whether it's in consulting, whether it's in research and development, like a lot of tech jobs are also labeled in that category. That's really our largest sector of our largest sector of employment. Following that, we have other services, which really is other services. It's things that don't neatly fit into a category. I know corporate headquarters can fit in there. Like also there's other kind of like administrative things, some contractors, just depending on part of the challenge with some of this data is companies self-identify as certain NAICS codes, and then those NAICS codes go into here. So really, I kind of lump these together. And then government, of course, is, you know, a lot of why we have the consulting and the research and development in the corporate headquarters. And then also we have a list of private employers here. All of this just to give like a flavor of like what is happening, you know, what Arlington kind of looks like in, well, this was written in 2024. So what it looked like a few months ago and still does for the most part. And then next slide.
Sorry, one quick question. Do we know how many people live in Arlington?
We have about 226,000 people in Arlington total. So, and obviously a much smaller percent is it actually in the workforce, because that 226,000 includes like children, the elderly, non-working people, students, et cetera. So, yes.
Is there any account of how many of those of the workforce are online?
That's a great question. So this particular data set has not dug into that. There are other data sets that have, and it's tricky because as far as like knowing what jobs that are like based in Arlington are virtual is actually much harder to know than the number of people living in Arlington who work for virtual jobs. I think the most recent census, I don't have it in the presentation, but I think the most recent census put as high as 23% of Arlington residents like work remotely, which is much, much higher than 2019 where it was more like 4%. So that's definite. And I think like because in the past it was such a small number of people, but now it's much larger. I think a lot of, you know, whether it's Census, BLS or other groups are like figuring out new surveying techniques to better understand that population.
And thanks for addressing that question. Just as a reminder, and I should probably do a better job of doing this at the beginning of our meeting. For our EDC ground rules is only EDC members can ask questions and participate. But thank you, that. Thank you. No worries.
Yes.
Do we know how many Arlington residents are federal workers?
Great question. The short answer is no. But we do, because there's not a great database to tell us exactly. Like, we know how many work in government, but that includes state, local, and federal. What we do know is that in the Virginia 8th Congressional District, which is basically most of Northern Virginia inside the Beltway, there's 72,000 federal workers. So that is in Arlington, City of Alexandria, Falls Church, and the parts of Fairfax County that are inside of Virginia 8. Okay, let's go to the next one. So I know we've been hearing a lot about the 25 to 34-year-olds and are they leaving Arlington? The short answer is yes. So this is a table I created with census data looking at changes in population growth from 2018 to 2023. And these are the two age groups that had a significant drop in population since 2018. Children under 5 and 25 to 34-year-olds. However, if we come over here, we see we're actually growing in a lot of other categories. So it's and while none of these categories are as large as the 25 to 34-year-olds leaving, it is still net positive in growth. So it's a complicated story. And one that I think, is really at least what I'll get in. And then in the middle, two that didn't statistically change in a statistically significant way. And what I kind of see here, and what I've kind of heard, kind of talking to people, looking through data, and we're going to get into a whole lot of other data sets after this, is that housing prices is definitely a driver in this. If you think about it, someone who's 25 to 34 years old might be the folks having the under 5-year-olds. So if they're leaving, the under 5-year-olds are also leaving. Whereas you see here, your 35 to 54 are actually growing consistently, which is consistent with the fact that, someone is still buying our $1.9 million houses. If no one were buying our houses, they would drop in value. So, and you think about earning potential through someone's life, like you're probably not 25 and able to purchase that. And if we go to the next slide, we'll break apart a little bit about housing cost in Arlington. So this data over here is median price for buying and renting in Arlington, Virginia, as of October 2024. A single family detached home anywhere in Arlington, this is just the median price, is 1.3 million. If you had a 20% down payment, which is $260,000, you would still need an income of about $280,000 a year to qualify for that home. That's a pretty steep bar. Even if you drop into single family attached homes, AKA townhomes, it's still $900,000. And again, in order to have a 20% down payment, you need $180,000 stashed away somewhere and a minimum income of at least $193,000. And that assumes you have excellent credit and no other debt. So obviously for each individual human, this becomes a much more complicated tapestry because people do have car loans, people have a personal loan, people, may not have $180,000 sitting around. And this seems to be a big part of why younger, early career folks are leaving, because folks early in their career they don't have this. If they want to buy a home and start a family, it's just not feasible here. And then even as you get into the rentals, you start to see we've talked about how there's a shortage of work-ready folks in the service and hospitality industry. And a big part of that is, they can't afford to live anywhere near here. Even for a 1-bedroom in Arlington, you would still need a minimum income of $83,000, assuming excellent credit and no debt, which is definitely a lot of money. So this is just something to think about as we talk about Arlington. And we think about, okay, well, what do people make and what do people need to make to be able to stay here? Next slide.
Yeah, hold on. Brian's got it.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Quick question on the previous slide where it listed the the outflow of 25 to 34, do you have a percentage? Like what the total population is?
Of the total, I do like 2 slides after this.
Oh, yeah, that's apologies.
It's about, I think it's about 2%.
And now that we're back on this slide, I wanted to ask, is this adjusted for just the fact that we're all getting older and people are aging into these groups versus people like actually, like, for example, the 65 years and older, how much of that is, if any, really is people over in that age bracket, like coming to Arlington?
Sure. So this isn't, and that's actually a great question. This is not indicative necessarily of not necessarily indicative of people moving. It is part of that because, you know, you have population growth. You can either be aging or moving. So in the case of aging, I would be more inclined to think that these are folks who are, you know, probably in place and aging, because 65 years old, I mean, you know, that's kind of, you know, very large generation right there. So it's a blend of the two. We'll get a little later into like kind of starting to detangle that. Yes.
Yes, so we actually have a question from Brian Stout, who's also an EDC commissioner who is virtual. He asked for the 25 to 34-year-olds, are they moving out of Arlington but staying in the region, or are they moving out of the region entirely?
Both. We're gonna get to that. It's in terms of age bracket, I would need to be like an actual statistician and probably have a different job in order to really be able to segment that out. But we have some proxy measures coming up, so get excited.
And Brandon, thank you for this. This is great. This probably isn't an easy question, but looking at these numbers, obviously they seem very high at first glance. Is there any way to get a little more context? In other words, are there peer cities that we kind of can compare ourselves to, like a Hoboken, New Jersey, or somewhere outside of Chicago or Los Angeles or even London, just to get like a rough idea? Is this does that fall in line with similar capital cities, or is there a real difference here?
Sure. So I don't have that in this.
If I could tag on sort of another follow-up piece, you know, it might be interesting to get a little more color on the mortgage thing, because there's an enormous number of mortgage programs available to people where part of your down payment is financed, depending on your income. You know, the income qualification levels can be adjusted, things like that. So the straight up 20% and annual qualification represents a lot less than 100% of mortgages.
Sure. No, and that's definitely true.
I'm not saying it's
this was just illustrative.
easy, but the picture may be less dire than these numbers suggest.
Yes, I think the challenge with the lower down payment is your monthly mortgage still goes up proportionally. In a lot of cases. And also with like the state-backed program, the interest rates are sometimes higher than conventional or jumbo mortgages. So it's like really complicated. And I mainly just kind of put this here less as saying like, this is the way things are, and more just a quick illustration. As far as prices go, I've got a little bit of this later for like full metro areas. As far as where we benchmark, I don't have that in this presentation. We're kind of in the middle in a weird way. Like the Sun Belt has gotten a lot more expensive in the last 10 years. But then also like New York, Boston and San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles have also gotten more expensive. You know, the median rent for a 1-bedroom in Manhattan is over $4,000 a month. So like, you know, yes, we're quite a bit cheaper than that. But as far as, where do we rank otherwise, it's complicated, but that kind of, we can definitely pick that apart more. Okay, and next slide. So kind of, and again, this is really just illustrative, and this is just using very high level data. Really looking at median listing price for any type of home, be it condo, anything on the residential real estate market, and the change in 24 to 34-year-old, 25 to 34-year-olds. And what you start to see is since 2018 to 2023, and we also have the median price per square foot, which is because in a lot of Northern Virginia, the housing prices are, still looking pretty high, but the size of the house you get with that money varies a lot. And obviously it's not a perfect correlate. It's not a perfect correlation, but you can see the higher price per square foot, you have a drop in the number of 25 to 34-year-olds, whereas down here in like Charles County, Maryland, Stafford County, Virginia, and Frederick County, Maryland, you see a huge, you see like an increase in 25 to 34-year-olds with about half the housing price per square foot. And if any of you all have been to one of these communities recently, you will see it's grown quite, that these places have grown quite a bit from like what you may have known 10 years ago. Okay, next slide. And then if we zoom out and thinking of benchmarking nationally, so what we start to see is I took the top 5 metro areas in the country that gained 25 to 34-year-olds. And then, so this is the number gain, this is the number increase, and then this is the percent of population. And I looked at median price per square foot. Again, this is not scientific, but you tend to see, with the exception of, with the outlier of Seattle, that you have a lower median price per square foot, which is consistent with a lot of the anecdote that folks keep hearing about, you know, like buying a house in Dallas or Atlanta or something. I do want to caveat, as a Sunbelt native myself, part of the reason that houses could be a lot cheaper in Dallas and Atlanta is because they're physically much farther away from the downtowns than what we're used to here in the mid-Atlantic. So like, you know, in Atlanta, it's something like the average commute is like 37 miles one way. That's like very normal. It's not unusual at your office to have a 90-mile commute one way. Whereas that's pretty out there for the DC region. We tend to like to live a little closer together, have a denser urban space. So I would say that it's not as though like these cities are like geospatially distributed in the same way and creating these prices. On the converse, where you see the shrinkage in 25 to 34-year-olds, with the outlier of Chicago, which there's a whole lot of macroeconomic like reasons that Chicago is an outlier, but outside of that, you tend to see higher price per square foot. And then the next slide.
Sorry, these are cities, like.
These are metro areas.
Oh, they're metro.
Yeah, this is full metro area. City to city is really hard because like Washington, DC is like this big, whereas like Los Angeles is like this, like it's MSA is just easier. But even then, like adjusted, it's like, you know, the cities up here tend to be more spread out spatially over more land mass than the cities here in terms of like population density. Okay. And then, so this is kind of consistent with Arlington, and this kind of helps us better understand like Arlington's population change over time. Now, this is something you may have seen in some of Terry Clower's reports or some other places locally to talk about this like out-migration of domestic-born residents. So when you have population growth, there's really 3 kinds. There's natural, you know, which is the number of births minus the number of deaths. There's international, people moving from abroad to here, or international residents moving from elsewhere in the United States to here. And then there's domestic, which is people born in this country and then moving. As you can see in Arlington, we've consistently had a net negative domestic growth since 2013, which does help explain the narrative, which does help explain the anecdote of even if we are having some growth, you know, some very modest, but still positive growth in population, why we're hearing, why it feels like everyone's moving, because there's a good chance that like you're more likely to know someone who was born here and lives here and left than you are someone who is from somewhere else and just moved here, or someone who was just born. So that, you know, and when you kind of stack this up, like in terms of benchmarking against metro areas nationally, like this is what you see in New York City, Boston, San Francisco, Los Angeles, like you see this exact same trend. And then in terms of our peers regionally, like you see this exact same trend in pretty much every DC metro area county, except for Frederick, Maryland, Charles, Maryland, and Stafford, Virginia. So next slide. And then, so what does this mean? So we've been, and actually I misquoted you earlier on 226, it's 235. Thank you. So I knew it was in here somewhere. So in terms of what this means, so we're like, okay, I just had a whole lot of data thrown at me. So you're saying like everyone who, like people who are born here are more likely, are like, you know, a lot of people who are born in the US are leaving, but also we're growing in certain age groups, but also we're expensive, but maybe not as expensive. So let's just kind of, you know, because it then comes, well, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And one thing that you'll note here is that even though you are having a drop in this 25 to 34-year-old, you are seeing an increase in residents with bachelor's degrees and an increase in residents with graduate or professional degrees. You also see an increase in median household income, and this is inflation adjusted, for families. So yes, like a core age group is moving out. At the same time, we're also not getting less educated. We're actually more educated, which I think can be partly explained by kind of that 35 to 54-year-old like moving here to buy the nice houses. Next slide. And then educational attainment. So what does this look like nationally? I mean, Arlington has consistently for over a decade been one of the most educated communities in the nation. It depends on if you're using a census survey that considers Falls Church a county equivalent or not. If you're using one that does consider it, Arlington's number 2. If you're using one that doesn't include Falls Church, we're number 1. So, and then this is compared to other metro areas. As you can see, we are very educated, even within the context of the Washington region. You know, our educational attainment metrics are quite high. Just again, to provide some context for like what that means is like we are very educated. Next slide, please. So this is a fun data set, and this is a weird one because it's really rich data, but it only tells you like the number of tax returns that moved from one county to another. I'm not able to break this apart by household income. I'm not able to break this apart by age group, nothing. But it is really interesting to see. It's like when people leave, you know, when people move to Arlington, where are they moving from? So Montgomery County, Maryland, which makes sense. Like a lot of moves are local. So obviously local jurisdictions are going to rank highly in here, but also Middlesex County, New Jersey, and Middlesex County, Massachusetts come in for like Boston and New York metro areas, as well as Suffolk County, which is, I do believe that's the county where the city of Boston is located. And then Allegheny is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then Honolulu. I imagine that's because like of all the defense presence in Hawaii. You probably have a lot of back and forth. Leaving Arlington 4, what we can see is that the net and moving to Arlington, we have a net gain of new people to the region, new people to the workforce. Leaving Arlington, all of these except for Manhattan, New York County, New York, are in our commute shed. So even if someone is leaving, they may still work here, and they definitely are still involved in our regional economy. And if you go to the next slide, this is our commute shed. It's huge. So this is us in the middle, Arlington right here. The reason that says 85,000 instead of 57, like on the last slide, is this is a data set that's trying to get at the work from home population. So that's why it went up considerably. But as you can see, the dark blue is really our core commute shed. So all the way down to Stafford County, Loudoun over here, Anne Arundel in Maryland. This is really our core commute shed. But as you can see, there's still like counties where like there's still people in the hundreds all the way out to like Frederick County, Virginia, and Baltimore County, Maryland, and even like Spotsylvania County, Virginia, still in the hundreds of people commuting here for work. So our commute shed is very large because our jobs are pretty attractive. And next slide. So where are people going then? So obviously most moves are local. Where are they going if they leave the region entirely? So the counties didn't change much on moving to, since most people were moving from outside the region anyway. Leaving Arlington 4, you kind of get this like picture that is not what you expect, with the exception of the city of Richmond. City of Richmond would sort of be your affordable alternative. So like folks who are like, wow, things are a lot cheaper in Richmond. This is the one where you have like housing costs that are much lower. I mean, Cook County too, but that's kind of an outlier for a lot of reasons. So really what you're kind of seeing here is you've got a lot of got a lot of well-educated folks moving to like cities like New York, Denver, Brooklyn, Los Angeles. That's not necessarily about affordability, but it may be, at first glance, but maybe more about, jobs or changing employment.
So Brandon, we've got a couple of different things. We've got numbers that show an age group that we're concerned about reducing. We have numbers that show housing prices increasing. We therefore assume that that's why they left. I assume that nobody has surveyed these people. And then we have this data, which granted is not broken down by age or anything else, but which does not really show people leaving for cheaper places.
Yep.
How do we, what do we make of all of this? It sounds to me like there's some pieces missing here if we want to assume that housing is our problem.
Well, and
I'm going to make this suggestion. I think that is the crux of our discussion. I'm sensitive to Dave. I want to make sure Dave gets, and then we can hopefully have a good, robust discussion. But yeah, and I would say, like, I think that at least from my perspective, I want to figure out, like, I don't think there's necessarily a presumption in terms of what we're trying to communicate. Or what the staff is trying to communicate, but there's a lot of good facts here. But let's keep it going so that we can address that question. So we'll pick that up as the first thing.
Okay, next slide. So then kind of what we get to is another thing that we've heard about, and I know like my team in particular talks a lot about this, is tech brain drain. And it doesn't sound like it makes sense because we just talked about how much more educated we are. However, within the tech space, the Washington region tends to be a net exporter of talent. When it comes to tech talent more specifically, the Washington, D.C. region is the third largest producer of tech talent, like in our universities and everything, after New York and Los Angeles. However, we do have a challenge retaining a lot of that entry-level talent. We don't have, and it's interesting because the problem, I think, has shifted. I think at one point it was more about job readiness. And I, worked very closely with Dave Remick and Steve Cooper on a program to address that. Now it seems like entry-level software development there's not as much demand as there used to be. And that's really kind of what's holding us back now. So if we go to the next slide, we're kind of seeing, here's where it gets like strange, and we have to blend anecdote and this. So it says computer occupations is what we're lacking, which is true. However, it's really more mid-career computer occupations where we're lacking talent and where employers like Amazon and others, are importing it from other markets. And then on the flip side, it says we have a food and beverage serving workers surplus, which anyone who works in that space definitely knows there is not. And what this data does not take into account is really job readiness. So that's something Dave will talk about in just a moment. And then if we go to the next slide. So some things that we're doing here in Arlington on brain drain. Obviously, we as a department can't just pay a bunch of like mid-career software developers to move here. So what are we doing? With the Arlington Innovation Fund, we're helping tech startups grow here. We're helping foster ecosystem initiatives that are really bringing communities together. And we also we're working with major employers to create resource fairs about, hey, how do you get involved in tech in our community? To create more stickiness, because we know that a lot of our tech talent may not have lived here that long, but we want them to, even if they leave their large employer, like stay here and use their tech skills here and start their businesses here. And with that, I will jump over to Dave Remick. Thank you.
It was an awesome presentation. I'd actually like to spend more time doing that. So talking, but you get me, and that's what. All right. So my name is Dave Remick. How y'all doing? I'm with Arlington Department of Human Services. I run a commission, the Alexander Arlington Regional Commission. It's a dual jurisdiction commission. We provide oversight over federal funds to train people for jobs in our region. Now, we talk about region. I want you to know that our Regional Workforce Council intentionally said, what region do we participate in and should we be focused on? And it was the Greater Washington region. So my data, for the most part, is going to be the Greater Washington region. But I can get you any data that you want, and I'm going to flip through these slides relatively quickly because many of you probably have federal job questions, and I can answer some of them. But you can certainly have this presentation later on. And I have my contact information in the back. So if you need any data drawn down to the most detailed level, just let me know. Next slide, please. We're a business-led board of 30 people. Some of you around the table have been or are on our board. And it's a good group of people that we talk about, the regional needs from a talent pipeline perspective and how to solve those issues. Next slide. All right. So the question was asked to me, how many jobs are out there that are open right now? In any given month, there are about 200,000 jobs in the greater Washington region that are open. 15 to 20% of them are tech related. And as Brandon mentioned, they could be a mixture of entry, middle, and high level jobs. We've talked about the computer, mathematical occupations, management occupations. So this is a list of occupations. Brandon was looking at more industries. So while you would think about management occupations, all types of management occupations, healthcare, sales, things of that nature. We have culinary mixed in there, hospitality. But at the end of the day, in the past 12 months, there were over 2 million job openings in the greater Washington region. Now you say, wow, that's a lot. And what we've also heard was that there are more openings than we have people. Yes, we have a talent shortage in the greater Washington region. There's really a talent shortage everywhere in the world. I've talked to many people across the world, and the issues that we have here are similar over there. So as you can see, total openings. Next slide, please. I'm going to start again. No. So where do we get our talent pipeline from? Well, one of the ways we get talent pipeline is from the people who are not working right now. Well, we have the lowest unemployment rating in the greater Washington region, in Virginia, pretty much in the mid-Atlantic area, 2.0% or 2.1% now in Arlington. It's wicked low in Northern Virginia, also very low in DC. So we're going to say, can we take the people that are unemployed right now and put them back into jobs? It would not scratch the surface as far as the number of jobs that are open. Can we go back to the slide with the openings for a second? I do want to make a mention of something. Just because we have maybe 200,000 jobs open per month, it doesn't mean we actually have 200,000 jobs. Who here thinks that data is 100% accurate? Raise your hand. No, data is totally fallible. And recruiters have to do a lot to attract talent. So one position might have 5 or 6 different openings, and they may tailor to totally different types of people. So that 200,000 might be 100,000. Who knows? There's no data behind that. Also, people leave job descriptions online forever and don't take them off, so forth and so on. But this is our best guess. We go 2 slides forward. All right, there you go. So, all right. We can't rely on the people that are unemployed because there aren't that many of them right now, and let's hope that stays that way. That was a federal jobs thing that I think people missed. We have people coming through our public school systems, our community colleges, our colleges and universities. We have some of the best in the world here, and that'll help us with their talent pipeline issues. But where do our employers get most of their talent from? They steal from other employers, which is something that's happened forever. But the issue is a bit more complicated. It's not a one-to-one. Business and financial occupations don't steal from other companies that have similar occupations. A lot of the jobs that we have in the greater Washington region can steal from multiple pools of talent. And so you might think you're safe in hospitality, where you only have to focus on the people in the hospitality pool that you may gain or lose. But childcare, retail, entry-level healthcare positions, entry-level many occupations could all go into something like hospitality. From a technological perspective, yes, there is some training that needs to be done, but people can move from one area to the other. There's a lot of mobility in occupations. And so while that's awesome for the individual, the company is forced to fight with people outside of their industry and occupational areas to get talent. Does that make sense? All right, next slide, please. All right, so I was asked, what are the top skills? Well, from a hard skill perspective, obviously there are the skills that we all need for our particular jobs. Of the 2 million jobs that are open in the greater Washington region, we took a look at what were the top hard skills, and you can see based on active job postings, it's really Microsoft related items. I don't care about this so much because there's a lot of data out there. It's just a lot of employers are really caring about the soft skills and professionalism skills. And on the Regional Workforce Council, this is what we care about most because it affects every single position. Talk to employers, and it doesn't matter if you're hiring a rocket scientist or a ditch digger. Having soft skills is the biggest thing that they need because they need to show up on time, listen to what you're doing, what you want them to do, and actually get it done. Communication is one of the biggest, if not the biggest need for any job in the greater Washington region. I put this out here more to say you all have voices. We need to make sure that soft skills are built into all the curriculums from pre-K to grade so that everybody's learning and mastering them. So when we're coming out of our talent pipeline in the school systems, regardless of where they happen to come out, that they're prepared with these things because this is what employers want. Next slide. All right, I'm going to skim through this last couple of slides really fast. This is just my soapbox. One of the things that we need to build talent is we need work experience. There are not enough companies in Arlington or the greater Washington region are providing work experience. They could be job shadowing, internships, externships, on-the-job training, whatever, to build people up. We are spending a lot of money putting people through schools. And again, it could be elementary school through graduate school, and they leave without having the experience that employers are looking for. So they have a hard time finding the jobs. We need to open our doors so that we can skill up the talent for the future. On our Workforce Council, we have several employers that provide work experience opportunities. And we held a discussion to see, is this really a heavy lift to provide work experience, internships, things of that nature? And they said, no. I'm not going to go through this because we have a little time left, but I wish that everybody would take a look at it. If you have questions, ask me. But if you're interested in developing an internship program or a job experience program or work experience, some sort of work experience program, I'll help you build that because we have so many thousands of people in our area that are interested in getting that work experience. Can you go 2 slides forward, please? All right, so I'm just going to talk really briefly about some of the services that we have at our American Job Centers, one of them being the Arlington Employment Center. For job seekers, obviously career counseling. If you don't know what to do, we help you figure that out. We have workshops to help you with resume writing and interview assistance. From a business perspective, if you have an individual working in your company that's not competitive for the job that they're in and you need to skill them up because they fit your culture, but you may not have the money to skill them up, meaning to get them an in-demand certification or license, we could work with you and potentially pay up to 90% of the cost. We want you to keep your staff instead of letting them go. On the job training, if you find somebody that meets 60, 70% of what you need, but they need some continuing education so that they could be the perfect employee for you, we can work with you to potentially offset some of the training you provide by paying some of the salary. These are some of the business services we provide. We also have a lot of recruiting opportunities so that we can push your information out to people that are looking for jobs. Next slide. Oh, I mean, I'm terrible if I didn't mention this. On March 29th at TJ Community Center, we are holding our annual Summer Teen Job Fair. If you or people you know in your network have summer teen jobs, you click that QR code or just call me and I'll get you the link. We have about 50 tables. We have about 40 of them already filled up. And we're looking for companies that are looking to hire summer talent. We have the schools that come into, all the high schools come into our into TJ. We have about 500, 800 students per year, and they all get summer jobs. And that's where you begin. Yes.
What's the age range for that?
14 to 18. 14 or more volunteer jobs, but you know, there are some good opportunities there. And then, because we talked about the federal workforce in the beginning, May 28th, I am close to securing George Mason University, Arlington campus to have some sort of job fair. Now, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a job fair in the sense of what we think a job fair is. There could be resources there. There could be headhunters there. We're still trying to figure that out. But I figure by May, we'll know enough to see what that event could turn into. Next slide, please. All right, and finally, talking about some of your tech talent pipeline, or your talent pipeline in Arlington. Obviously, at the public schools, you have tech, the career technical education. For some of us that are around the table, look as old as I am, we think of that as back in the day of the shop. It's not like that. They have NCIS type of training there. They have veterinarian training. They have a ton of different skills. They train people in not just to get their diploma, high school diploma, but they get in-demand certifications. They get dual credits in community college and George Mason University. Awesome programs. You should explore those things because those things build a workforce. We have our community college, both offering credit, non-credit programs, and they have some scholarships available to help defray the costs. George Mason, again, credit, non-credit training, awesome university. They have an advanced pathway partnership. People go into Northern Virginia Community College, and depending on what type of occupational track they're going into, they do a couple of years at Northern Virginia Community College. Then they go automatically into George Mason University and get their bachelor's degree. It's a great way of getting a great education at a reduced cost. Obviously, we have the AWS Skill Centers. Brian, I think you're on the phone, so shout out to you, another member of our Regional Workforce Council. We have great nonprofit training providers like Kitchen of Purpose that train people up in culinary skills. And then we have great tech training programs. SciLearn is an Arlington-based firm, as well as many others. Next slide. All right. What federal workforce questions do you have?
Let's give Brandon and Dave a round of applause. Do this. Brandon and Dave, join us at the table. And we guys see 2 open seats there, and let's open it up for discussion. Catherine, I'm going to open it up back up to you. It sounded like you had a question or perhaps a position that you wanted to share with the group.
Not so much a position, because I try not to reach those without data. You know, I saw a couple of different data sets which seemed not quite to connect. We all know Arlington is not cheap. Personally, I couldn't afford to buy here till I was in my 50s. I actually wonder if we surveyed this room and asked of reasonably accomplished people and asked at what age people bought their first dwelling. I guess it probably is not in the 25 to 34 age group. So that when we look at numbers that say the 25 to 34 age group is down, housing costs are up, I'm not sure that B led to A. The other question I would have is that if we asked a demographer to look at those numbers, is the 25 to 34 age group down more than we would have expected given the size of the flow through that? You know, people aging in and aging out. Is it up, down more? Is it down less? I mean, I think there's a level of subtlety that would be great if it's possible to get to it. The other reason that I wonder about how to think about the relationship between housing costs and the possibility that people are moving away in an age group we care about is the tax return data, which showed people moving out basically to non-cheap places. You know, so I think what I was trying to throw out there was maybe there's potential, given the infinite time we all have, to do a deeper dive with some of the data and see if we can get a little more complex and subtle with conclusions we can draw. And that's really where I was trying to go.
Thank you, Catherine. I'll piggyback off that, and I want to open it up. And so I think this was really, really good data. And my 2 big takeaways is housing generally is regional, right? And so I think from my perspective, it's hard to look at Arlington County as its own housing bubble. You really have to look at it as a regional and think about it from that perspective. And the other big takeaway, just based on the numbers and the data, is living and working in Arlington are almost kind of 2 independent things.
Exactly.
Right? There's only, I think it's, 25% of people are living and working in Arlington, which means 75% of the people that are living in Arlington work outside of it, right? So I think that's good framing as we figure out what issues we want to discuss and tackle in this room. So thank you for that. Other questions, comments for Dave or Brandon? Brad.
I piggyback off of you a little bit. It was great data, very, very interesting. When you were going through the comparison of the different age groups and what the price per square foot is, I just wonder if that's the right metric. I mean, if you're comparing to other metropolitan areas, the nature of the housing is completely different in Washington DC versus like Dallas or Atlanta. Is there an ability to look at the percentage of income for a certain tranche of people, what they're actually paying towards housing, regardless if it's purchase or rental? I feel like that might be a better metric to see relative, expensiveness of this market versus others.
Sure. Such data does exist. It's usually data like that is more focused on the rental side, mainly because of the complex variables associated. I was just asked to kind of give a snapshot of what it would cost to buy a house. So I just kind of threw some numbers up. There's obviously way more complexity. It's usually why I generally try to stick to rental, because the price is the price. And that's just a much easier way to compare across the board. It is a good question. Kind of what you start to see is that for renting, at least, we do a little better. We're not great, but we're a little better when adjusting for income. You see cities like Miami in particular is way worse. Because Miami is like the third, most expensive rental market in the country after New York and San Francisco. But in terms of like median salary, it's like number 26. So like there's a huge disconnect there. Whereas here, from the median, there is a disconnect. It's not as big as you observe in some other places, like in New York City, where the median average income is not that different from here, but the median one bedroom is over $4,000 a month. So yeah, there is data that exists and some work that's been done. And, Washington, it's not to say that it suddenly becomes affordable, but it doesn't have nearly as pronounced a gap between the income and the housing as say like a Miami or a New York.
Sarah.
Just curious, have you all ever done, or could you see yourselves doing a qualitative survey of this age group in Arlington, those who rent/own?
I don't think in the short term. I think in part because in order to design something independently, that would really, kind of hold up to scrutiny. I think that would, it's pretty cost intensive.
Sure.
I've done some survey work like that in Maryland before, and it ended up just you kind of have the data, and then there's kind of the then what question, and you're, well over $100,000 into the survey, and it's just I don't envision it in the short term.
I would just be interested to see what is driving this age group. Something that hasn't been mentioned is relative safety of neighborhood. That I think Arlington is attractive for that group. Also social activities, things like that. So know how to get at that data.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's something I think, we'd like to learn more about. I don't know that we could commission like our own qualitative study of it, but, always looking out for feelers.
Sarah. Steve.
I won't go into great detail, but earlier this morning, I read this week's New York Magazine cover article, which was Boomers to the Rescue, the parents who pay for city lives and how they do it. And this is in New York City, right? It was fascinating. I'll send the link out. It's an interesting reference point for this area because certainly we have a concentration of affluent boomers. But it made me think about why we're not hearing more about that wealth transfer in the terms of removing barriers to entry to housing in this market for that 25 to 34-year-old demographic. And my mind just went to supply. Just, are there enough homes on the market, and what role does that play in some of this flight to surrounding areas or areas that are even more far flung? So interesting kind of reference point.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Other comments, questions?
I would just say that.
And who do we have from online? While we're
JD Spain.
Go ahead, JD.
No, I'll yield. There was, I think someone started, then I'll come in right after that.
Okay.
I would just say that there's an X factor that no one's considering, at least they haven't voiced it, is opportunity. Opportunity is probably a lot as to why are people moving in and out, whether it be opportunity for jobs, whether it be opportunity because a spouse, or if you're going back to move closer to your parents, or you just lifestyle changes. A lot of that plays into it. The final thing that I would say is, yeah, study to examine a problem, but how long would that study be relevant? You know, we did a training program with Steve for software development, and we were in the second cohort, and all of a sudden AI came in and took software development by storm. And then we had a hard time placing those individuals. That was a 3-month type of change. And so a lot can happen during that time.
Thank you. JD, go ahead.
Yes, good morning, everyone. And what a great number of presentations here. A lot of, for me, and then I'll take back to the colleagues of mine, a lot of, again, good information to digest. I would just say some of the things I'm picking up on when it relates to, solutions, right? I think where we are today, vis-a-vis 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? It's just not the same, y'all. I mean, folks are coming to me all the time about, housing inventory and more housing than supply. I heard we talked about this earlier. So I think the question becomes, at the end of the day, how do we, not just here in Arlington, but of course as a region, get more adequate stock in housing from, attainable rentals for this population, this group, right? And many others. Um, some may think is quite complex. I've heard a lot of folks use the line about, well, how old were you when you purchased your first home? Well, my wife and I were, we're about 36 years old when we purchased our home, right? But I think the dynamics in the economy have changed so much between, when my wife and I bought ours to what my kids, my children, who and what they're doing in that age group. So I think for us to consider, is what we're doing today sufficient enough uh, to bring in this population group that you talked about earlier? And Arlington has changed in the 16 years that I'm here, and the demand signal that I'm seeing is produce more housing, right? So look, I just want to share that with you because I'm trying to figure out, especially when it comes to housing, as I'm focusing on part of this conversation, is how do we get to yes in a lot of these things, to just and be creative and innovative in our approach. So look, I thank you this morning for everyone's coming out and attending. Kevin and team, thank you for what you're doing here at on the committee. And I just reach out to me if you want to talk. I have a meeting. But just want to share those comments as I sat here and listened to a lot of what was going on this morning. Okay, back over to you.
JD, thank you for sharing, and I'm glad you're hearing our conversation and these great presentations real time. I think one of the things that I picked up on is that many of the trends that we are experiencing are in line with similar communities. And one of the trends that we saw, and it harkens back to the CMRI crisis that we're talking about, is a lot of the more dense urban areas are losing population to less dense areas. And so that's not just Arlington. That is a macro trend, right? So I think part of what we need to acknowledge is what we're going through is not unique. And then, I had a question, is that one chart about net outmigration of domestic people, and it's been consistent net outmigration since 2014. I heard that is not unique relative to our profile of community. But let me ask you if was before that we were net in migration, right? So 2014 and it was, my first question is, was it consistent? And second question is, what changed?
Sure. So I don't have the chart I had only had back to 2010. I think that particular data set, you can go back to 1990, I think. I think a lot of what changed and this kind of,
Oh, go forward one.
oh yeah, it's
The bar chart.
The bar
chart.
Technical difficulties.
Okay, so yeah, like, so this chart goes back to 2010. I think this data set goes back to goes back to 1990, I think. But like, I actually got this specific graphic from Montgomery Planning where they did this actually for every county in the Washington metro area. And most of them look like this. And this is like, again, kind of what I suspect is in the, financial recession of like 2008, Terry and others have spoken about this as well. Like you saw a net migration of people coming to cities where there were more opportunity. Because particularly the Sun Belt was like completely devastated. And while like Greater Washington wasn't great, it was kind of buoyed by the federal presence and increased federal investment. And I think like a lot of your core like cities like us saw that kind of influx as like places like, Miami, Dallas, Las Vegas kind of evaporated. But then they kind of had this roaring comeback around in like the 2014 and so on. And that's kind of what I remember talking with Jeanette from, who used to be a GMU demographer. That's the trend we used to talk about, was that as job growth, accelerated in like Sunbelt cities, like a lot of people would go to explore those opportunities. Now, as we pointed out, that's Arlington specifically is a more nuanced story from like the region as a whole, because Arlington, it's like a very small subset of like the Washington region. So even if you were to take every single county in the region and say like, oh, there's a net migration of the Sun Belt, like our story is a little bit different, as we saw, because there's a lot of exchange with other expensive metro areas with people like changing and like high wage work. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments? I found this presentation to be very satisfying, so thank you. And it scratches.
Except for the outcomes.
Yeah, except for the outcomes. But thank you very much. So let's. Yeah.
Sorry, just an observation. Isn't a change in your population on a regular basis healthy? Having a refresh? And it looks to me that we're getting smarter people. That's good too, right?
That's a good positive note to end on. So thank you. So I'm really glad that we did this early. I think this is going to touch everything else we cover during the year and is central to what we're trying to achieve at EDC. So hopefully that was very helpful. Let's keep moving down the agenda and we will turn to Nick for updates on the commercial vacancy.
Thank you, Kevin. And Jen, could you pull up the federal workforce footprint? Again, that Ryan cited earlier. So thank you, Brandon and Dave. That was fantastic. Sounds to me like a lot of what we're saying is really, we can kind of tie it together. There are a lot of similar threads here. So, we had our meeting in January where we talked a lot about potential different avenues of where we could go this year. I think as time has gone on, particularly sitting here today, for me, that the path has become fairly clear. So when you think about, just to try to put this into context, those two middle points, the leases and the owned, generally speaking, that leased percentage is probably about 7 or 8% of the county inventory. The owned obviously would more than double it. So let's say that, between that, 13.2 million square feet, it's probably about 20% of the stock. That includes buildings like the Pentagon and others that are very unique. But that, that's worrisome to me. I think that, Ryan, you brought up a good point with context that a lot of those GSA leases are very, kind of high profile, highly secured, and are probably very critical. But thinking about the supply here, even if, just a few of those leases are terminated, the 5.3 million, that's probably equivalent to like 25 or 30 buildings. That's a lot of space. So thinking about again, this is a little bit more my opinion and my kind of ask of folks going forward. But one of the ways that we've talked about taking this group is pushing on the redevelopment process, removing some of the red tape, allowing developers to go through a quicker process. Just looking at a few things here, the inventory, number one, we're still oversupplied within this market. Number two, when we look at the recent, I think, and Ryan or Kate or Mark, correct me, but I think the most three recent site plan review meetings have been for current office buildings that are being redeveloped, but they would not fall under the adaptive reuse that was passed in November. They would fall under more of a redevelopment, a full redevelopment. So it's 3033 Wilson, it's Roslyn Gateway, and it's right just to the south of us or west of us, 4601. So that the market's kind of telling us where the demand is and where projects are potentially going to be moving this year. And then the demographic, I must say that the 25 to 34, it's not great, but it's not as alarming to me as I thought it was coming into this. But when you tie all those together, I think it's clear that we have a real opportunity where places that potentially we could influence. We can't influence interest rates. We can't influence what the federal government, what the administration is going to do. But if we can kind of unlock some of the supply and the speed at which it can be redeveloped, I think that's something that I really want to try to focus on.
Well said, Nick. Any quick questions or comments, Brad?
Yeah, quick question of that. This is my sense, and I don't have the data to support this, but the 5.3 million, in your opinion, would those tend to be in buildings that are considered less desirable?
Yeah, great question. So a lot, like, let's say, for example, there's a DOD lease in this building. If it's one or two floors, that doesn't mean that this building is going to be a candidate for redevelopment. I'm thinking more, though, of a full building on the south side of National Landing. It's 45 years old and has 20 by 20 column spacing. It does not have a future if it vacates in full. It does not have a future as being a private sector released building, at least in not today's world. And further, it's not a candidate to be redeveloped in its current footprint, at least from what I know. I defer to folks like Andy and others. So therefore, a redevelopment to me would be the most likely. Otherwise, it could sit there with a very low value for an extended period of time, much like a Victory Center down on Eisenhower that sat for 15 years vacant.
Thank you, Nick. Evan, any updates this month?
Not really. We're just continuing to go through the process of identifying goals and process discussions, community engagement and feedback. So nothing much to report.
That's great. We're here to support you as needed. Praveen, do you want to report on your meeting?
First of all, thanks to Kevin and Nick for trusting me to represent the EDC in front of a convening of all the commissions by County Manager Mark Schwartz. I think he was mostly in listening mode and wanted to hear about the different priorities for the different commissions. He had been doing the rounds with different groups. I think he had met with the different civic association groups the night before. And so on behalf of EDC, working with Kevin and talking about our priorities, he communicated two priorities to him. One was that continue leading into CMRI, making sure that that is a priority, particularly as we see our neighbors in Maryland and DC leading into, initiatives and redevelopment as well. And two, to also, there are budget constraints in the county and, they are looking at areas where, there could potentially be cuts, but to advocate strongly for AED. We actually think it's a department that is a revenue generating department and actually increase staff in areas like, business retention or, real estate planning. And we actually think that that's going to, solve some of our budgetary crisis by bringing more revenue into the county. So those are the two priorities I communicated, and he was very intent in listening to that. And the other thing that I also say is that listening to a lot of the other commissions, there's a lot of intersectionality in the things that we're talking about, like housing, transportation. There's a real opportunity there that not that EDC should take the lead in some of these issues, but working with those commissions to see how our data can supplement some of the things that they're advocating for from an economic development perspective. So I thought that was very interesting. And I don't know what that looks like, but there is an opportunity there to increase collaborations with different commissions.
That's great. Thank you, Raveen. And I think a good tee up for next month, because I believe we're going to have County Manager Mark next month.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Hopefully, to talk about the budget. right on time. Thank you, guys. Very robust discussion. So meeting adjourned. Thank you.